Well, I'm going to get us started off because this is such an exciting conversation. I had the privilege of sitting with our wonderful panelists and our moderator as they prepped for the call this last week. And I just was thrilled to have this conversation and to share it, that you guys will all be able to hear it and be part of it. It's such an important conversation. So many things right now talking about DEI and diversity, equity, and inclusion, and how important it is in our society and in our workforces to think about then overlaying that with technology, and how technology plays a role in it and is impacted by it. All together, those three important elements is just really exciting. And I think you're really going to enjoy this conversation. I'm glad you're joining us today. My name is Kim Lanfear, and I'm Apparo's Chief Executive Officer. You are participating in what we call our CXO Tech Insights, which are sponsored by Amazon Web Services over the whole course of the year. This is the last one in our fiscal year, which ends in June. And this particular topic of technology and the drivers and impacts of technology on it is sponsored by Captech, and we are thrilled that they are here today and sponsoring this important conversation. Anthony is our moderator, and I'll introduce him in just a minute. Is Brian Bach here yet? He may wait till the end. Sometimes he waits till the end.
He's not here yet.
He's not here yet. Okay. So we will let our overall sponsors speak later in our event, and we will wrap the event with breakout rooms so you can continue the conversation as well as have some networking virtually together. We do hope to start off our season of CXO Tech Insights in September of 2021 and hope that they will be in person. So look forward to that. And we also will be having our Connectivity Bash for those of you who are sponsors of that event. It's going to be an outdoor event in October. So look for information of that as it comes along. All of these things, today's event, as well as our connectivity series, all work to make the mission of Apparo happen. Apparo creates connections in the community that lift the missions of nearly 600 area nonprofits as they work to serve those who are marginalized and who are in situations of needing support in our community. Apparo does that by bringing skilled volunteers in from our partners around the community to lift in both business processes and technology. If you would like to be engaged in that and are not yet, we would love to have you be part of the fabric of our community that does this really exciting work that also lifts the employees in your employ through professional development and their tendency to be retained more easily because they're out there skilled volunteering. So with that, all of that information, I'm going to turn it over to Anthony to introduce himself and to tell us a little bit about Captech and why they're here today, and then introduce our wonderful panelists. Thank you again.
Excellent, Kim, and thank you so much for that introduction, and thank you to Apparo for bringing these forums together where we can connect and really build relationships and share valuable insights as we continue to grow as leaders and help our organizations advance our mission. I'm really excited as well about this, and I think all of us wish we could be there in person. To what Kim has mentioned, many of us probably have come to know virtual fatigue very well and being on video screens quite a bit, but we do want to send a great thank you to our panelists who have made time to invest in this time and conversation tonight, as well as all of you who are part of our audience. Thank you for investing the time. At some point, we know on the horizon, we will be able to get together in person again and build those connections in person, but we do thank you for making the time and investment to connect this evening. From a Captech perspective, for those of you who are unaware of our business, we're very privileged and honored to be a partner of Apparo's as they look to transform their community. It aligns very closely to the values of our organization. Captech is a national consulting firm, and we partner with our clients and really collaborate with them to think about how technology can be a lever to provide incremental business value to both their customers and their employees. And we like to think about our services really being wrapped into 4 core areas. How you think about delivering an end-to-end project, from the customer experience and design to development and build through systems integration, looking at insights and reporting and analysis of data, and really wrapping everything around how we manage through agile delivery or even traditional project management is how we support many of our clients. While we were preparing for this event, I mentioned to several who are on the panel that I lived in Charlotte for 17 years, so very familiar with the Charlotte area, but I am currently serving now as the Atlanta office lead for CapTech. I've been at CapTech for a little over 3 years. I moved back to Atlanta in 2017 to really help us grow our national and local presence from the Atlanta market perspective. And internally, I support some of our local roles around championing diversity and inclusion, as well as career development of our people. I am very excited because our mission at CapTech is really to help foster an inclusive culture and really celebrate diversity and a sense of belonging. And so with that, I want to tee up introductions of our panelists. I'm going to allow all of them to introduce themselves. But for our audience, I really want you to lean into the conversation tonight. They will share some really good insights, not only from a technology perspective, but also from specifically how organizations that they align to and are a part of are supporting the mission of diversity, equity, and inclusion, and how that intersect with technology is really helping bring those business goals to life. So having said that, I'm going to allow the panelists to introduce themselves, and we will start with Leica.
Thanks, Anthony. Thanks, Kim. Once again, thanks for the invite to be part of the panel. Again, and I'm really excited to not only share my points of view, but in working with Daryl and Xenia as well, very interested in terms of understanding how we all as tech leaders play an important role within the topic of DEI. I'm personally, my role is that of a chief architect and futurist. So a lot of what I do is really enabling solutions for the future. And needless to say, AI and all aspects of AI are very critical to our thinking, and not only from a business process standpoint, but in terms of how we're going to make our solutions work. And then more importantly, how do we build our workforce to be ready for the future? So again, looking forward, and over to you, Xenia?
Yes, sure. So thank you for having me. I'm very excited to have this discussion with everyone. My name is Xenia Lane, and I am part of the Truist team. I support the enterprise personalization strategy, really through the development of a client experience platform that can connect and create a client experience that spans all of our channels.
Good evening. I'm Daryl Thompson. I'm the CIO for Coca-Cola Consolidated. We're located here in Charlotte, and we're the largest bottler in the United States that bottles, distributes, and manufactures the Coca-Cola line of products. So I'm responsible for all enterprise technology decisions for Coca-Cola. We support primarily the Southeast and the Mid-Atlantic states, have about 15,000 teammates. We consider ourselves servant leaders. That's something that I'll talk a little bit about through this conversation, about our purpose and how it relates to what we feel around diversity, equity, and inclusion. It's just a very important part of what we do every day to make folks feel like they're valued and a part of the company through everything that we do. So looking forward to the conversation.
Excellent. Thanks, Leica, Xenia, and Daryl. And with that, I think we're all excited and ready to jump in. We're going to share a few questions. We know chat is our friend. We've been using that more often in these virtual times. So if there are specific questions that we may have time to ingest from the chat feature, please feel free to do so. Our panelists may have specific answers to certain questions, but may also comment and add some additional commentary as they hear each other's remarks. But we're going to go ahead and get started. Now, while we're going to get into technology, for those of you who are very excited about that intersection with DEI, we're going to first just kind of talk about DEI overall from a general perspective of what we mean by diversity, equity, and inclusion. And so I want to kind of warm the conversation up a bit tonight and start with you, Xenia, in asking this question. When you think of a work environment and a workforce that is focused on diversity, equity, and inclusion, what really resonates with you, and why do you think this is such an important topic that we need to lean into?
So I think it's important to ensure that we've got representation across all of the communities we support. So at Truist, our purpose really is to inspire and build better communities. And in order for us to do that appropriately and to really represent those communities we serve, we really should also look like those communities and have that diversity. So making sure that we have a focus and line of sight into how it is that we want our teammates to represent those broader communities that we serve is very important to us and to me personally.
Excellent. Leica, you want to share your perspective there?
Right. I would say that, several large corporates, they have embraced the philosophy of DEI even before it became cool to say so. But, and adding to Xenia's point, to me, rubber really meets the road, not just in having diversity in the workforce, which is obviously needed, but how does it really translate into the products, right? Because that to me is the true benefit. So while we may have a diverse workforce, amazing metrics, the investors are happy, but true realization is when we are serving all kinds of communities. And then that's where you need to make these important business decisions as to, hey, am I going to have the same lens, a broad lens across a very large community, or am I going to be very targeted so that the products that I offer really make sense to specific community? And to me, it's the true amalgamation of not just the workforce, but the quality of the products that this diverse workforce really puts out.
I think that's an excellent point. And I like how you and Xenia tied in the representation across all groups. We're going to come back to that here shortly. Daryl, your perspective on, when you think about DEI, kind of your personal focus and why you feel this is important to your role within Coca-Cola.
Sure. So it was interesting to hear Xenia, and while we did a kind of prep call, we don't know what each of us are going to say and how we're going to off.
Right.
It's about being a part of the community and extending the community, understanding the products that we build or the services we provide need to have aspect on what our teammates, what our customers are experiencing. Those are also relevant. I'll just tell you, I look at it in a perfect world. I try to always view what's a perfect vision if we could have anything we wanted. But think about that workplace for me that makes everyone feel, regardless of who they are and what they do for the business, whether they're tenured, new, any race, gender, doesn't really matter. They feel equally involved and are supported in all areas of their workplace. They have access to all types of resources, whether it's an up and coming opportunity, like another job that they could transfer into, or that they have learning and development opportunities. They have a voice and they're accepted for who they are, their true self, and they have some type of belonging to their organization. And that it just really extends with what I heard Xenia and Leica both say about how they work with their mindset, with whether they're working in the community or on their teams. We're so culture driven at Coca-Cola. We live and breathe it every day, or at least we try to emulate that. And so because we've seen such growth, we grew from 5,000 teammates in 2014 to about 16,000 currently today. And so one of the things that you get your best from the team, from the folks that work with you and for you, and with the mindset of how would I personally feel if I didn't feel I could be valued by my employer, or that what I said had merit or value. And so I just take that to heart. And I've just learned as a leader that folks want to know sincerity. So again, as we talk about this conversation, a lot of us will go through motions, that we have to check the box of showing, hey, how was your weekend, whatever. But there's a level of some sincerity when you get into this topic of really caring about your team and about all employees and about all staff.
Daryl, I know you said at the beginning that you're going to touch on servant leadership, which I am a huge advocate for. It's one of the core values of CapTech. And I love how you talked about how the goal is to ensure that we have access and there is belonging for people and people feel valued. In this COVID pandemic season, in this period of time, there were some studies done, and Glassdoor actually reported that employees feeling valued and feeling like culture was one of their top reasons for retaining their employment at an organization. And so right now, while there have been different shifts, I think years ago, there was all about what's kind of advancing from an innovative technology perspective, and that's still at the forefront. Now we're starting to see more of that human connection that's kind of been driven by some of the societal times around us. So it's great that you hit that point. One of the things to lean into too, because I think organizations are constructed very differently. In some organizations you have a chief diversity and inclusion officer, or maybe specific teams that are working with that. that specific initiatives. In some organizations, like in CapTech, where we have a council, which is co-led by one of our leaders in our consulting practice and our HR business partner, and then our co-CEO serves as an executive sponsor for. I think it'll be great for you to share organizationally a little bit about how your companies are kind of stood up a framework of diversity and inclusion, and how do you as a technology leader interface and work with whoever or whatever teams may be driving that forward. So let's start with Leica this time for that question.
Specifically, I think the good thing that we've done, where being a large and especially very global corporate with so many countries, is to really drive home that concept of DEI. So while there are the DEI specific, overall leaders directly getting in, directly reporting into the CXOs, they haven't necessarily segregated that as just an HR function. So it's essentially across each and every, business group, technology group, several layers down below. So while it is like broad across the firm, across regions, across geographies, it also goes down every, department and organization. And the whole context is like, okay, let's not start with the intent of just meeting some numbers because the board said so, or the CXO said so, right? Let's try to look at what necessarily makes sense, because it may not necessarily be that everybody is good at everything, right? But everyone still has talent which has which needs representation in different areas. So whether it's legal, whether it's compliance. I mean, when we say tech, again, tech has multiple roles. You have the core engineering roles, but then you have testing roles, you have agile roles, you have financial roles. So how do we look at our organization as a whole? And this varies based on your function, whether you're whether you're customer facing, whether you're actually designing products, or are you on core IT kind of serving the customers and the products that they're putting out. But the bottom line is it's not isolated to a specific group. They have made sincere attempts to be broad as well as deep, and then we go through the process of education. Biases are a big part of it. I mean, we are all human. I mean, how do you deal with that? Just by going to a training or a set of training or some sort of a conference, and am I suddenly going to switch off my core beliefs? Probably not. So how do you go through that cultural shift? And I would say that's an ongoing process. I mean, it's been several years to kind of get us up to this point. But it's a long journey, because as new workforce come in, the diversity or DEI angle also becomes generational, right? And we are seeing that with the society at large. So how do we, so there are some who are very firm in their values. We have to respect those. There are some of us who are in between and churning, and then there are some of us who are have a completely different mindset about how to even approach a corporate work environment, something, and it may be something as simple as dress code, right? So traditional companies and dress codes versus the new young bright talent we are getting in. How is that going to work? Bridging that generational gap. So it's essentially a lot of conversations, and even through the pandemic, I think through the pandemic, there's been extra effort really to reach out and talk at an individual level, to see how people are feeling. Because I mean, something as simple as internet. So there are folks who are in zip codes where the internet is not as strong. How do we help them, right? Can we can we give them a hotspot or do something of that sort? Let's not paint everyone with a broad brush. I mean, there are several folks who used to be who are literally struggling, because when they have small children, how do you manage to have a serious call at home when you're dealing with that kind of a situation? So how do you reach out and make provide a solution that may be very specific? So that's kind of overall how we've been trying to address pre-pandemic as well as pandemic. And then of course I'm sure the path forward will change once we are all back at work as well.
Leica, you hit on some very rich points there, really good. And we're going to come back and even talk a little bit about that connection from the human bias perspective to data and how we think about technology there. Before I see if Xenia and Daryl want to comment and chime in on something, one of the things that I love that you said is that it's not about the numbers. And oftentimes when companies think about how they're going to architect a strategy with diversity, equity, inclusion, they're thinking about checking the box. They're thinking about metrics. They're thinking about how do I ensure that we have the right programs and activities in place versus thinking about it from the perspective of embedding it within the culture. And that takes time. And that's what I heard you say, that this is an ongoing journey. This is a marathon. This is not a sprint. It takes time. You also mentioned something about how things are evolving generationally. There was a statistic that I read in an article that 70% of US millennials will weigh a company's values when they're making online purchases. So they're going to be looking more intently at the values of an organization. Are you supporting efforts that are serving the community, that are looking at diversity and inclusion and a sense of belonging as they're thinking about whether or not to give you their business? So it's really impactful. Xenia and Daryl, is there anything in addition to what Leica shared that you would add in terms of a focus on diversity, equity, and inclusion?
I would just say that within our organization, I think the approach, as Leica had mentioned, it's important that it is at the top of the house, but that also runs across and then deep. And so I think at Truist, it would be a similar mindset. So we do have a chief diversity officer who is kind of unique in her role. So she's not part of HR. She actually trees up into our chief legal officer, who's also responsible for diversity, equity, and inclusion. But it's very important for us to take an approach where it's culture driven. So it's not metric driven. At the end of the day, it's teammate driven, and it's the teammates and their cultures and what they bring to the table. And so the way that we've approached it has been kind of multi-pronged. It's been very grassroots. We have several groups that exist today that are specifically focused on increasing cultural awareness and inclusivity. We also have within each of the lines of businesses, teammates who come together who are part of what we call the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Council, where they actually think through what are activities or things that we can do as an organization, kind of sub LOB, within the group, to be able to promote our culture. And again, because it's at the level of the teammate, those ideas are pretty grounded in terms of the everyday, day-to-day interactions that are occurring. So I do think that it's important to, if we're really going to be committed to this, that we have to address it across multiple fronts, right? To ensure that it is part of the culture and fabric of who you are, as opposed to the check the box item, as you had mentioned.
Excellent.
Yeah, I'll just chime in real quickly, try to be brief. Consolidated, we've had a department or a team focused around culture and teammate engagement for years. Again, that's part of our purpose formation that we created years back. And so we have a vice president who leads that. Actually, it kind of works up through the chairman's office. Our Frank Harrison's the chairman and owner of the Coca-Cola Consolidated Company. But our president, Dave Katz, kind of spearheaded last year when we all went through a rough time in May. We really had a lot of social injustice really kind of forced right on us. And I tell a lot of folks, this didn't just happen last May. This has been happening for years, but we were very focused on it because we were all working differently at home, glued to TVs, couldn't interact with each other face to face like we normally did. So we bonded. Sometimes we bonded, sometimes we didn't bond, but we all realized we got to do something different. So it consolidated. Our president kind of formed that. I think, Xenia, you said the same thing. It's almost like a diversity, equity, inclusion committee, like a team that's going to focus this and kind of carry it forward through that culture and stewardship committee. And, they've all been assigned to the executive leadership team. And so I've got two folks that work directly with me in fostering those conversations that we want to get right out on the table. So there's a lot of engagement, that we're doing and teaching teammates. Again, understanding what is bias. So let's just start at the grassroots. Do we even understand what bias means? Do we understand how to be empathetic? Do we understand what our story, how our upbringing brought us to the point where we had bias, didn't have bias, open mind, closed mind, what have you? And I would just tell you, one of the things that's been the hardest, I feel like, because I'm a people person, I like to be around people. I love to talk. If I felt good about a topic, I love to talk. And, but it's hard to do that when you're on Zoom or Teams all day long. And I just had a teammate, had dinner with her Saturday night. And we talked about, how do we get back to the office? What are we missing? And this whole thing about what we're dealing with right now on this topic, she said, having everybody at home, we're skirting the issue because we're safe behind a team screen or a Zoom screen. And we can't go engage and have a tough conversation because the nicety of, I can just blank my screen out and I'm multitasking, not really looking. You can't see my face. You can't tell my facial expressions or my body language. And so when you hit a tough conversation with me, I can just be quiet. You don't know how I'll react. So I'm getting a little bit more anxious to want to get back to the office so we can engage and tackle some of these things head on. But the lucky part for Consolidated is we already had that culture aspect there. So the mechanisms, the platforms of how we talk to each other and how we lean in, we're kind of already present. This just gave us a catalyst to really re-emphasize the point of how everybody needs to have a seat at the table and what everybody thinks and can contribute has value. So
that's a great point you mentioned, Daryl. And I like in your commentary, you talked on engagement and interaction. And I'm a big fan too of the in-person connection. And we miss many of that in terms of being able to connect and really have that human community in person. One of the questions we received in the chat, or I received in the chat, that I want maybe one of you to comment on is, with that focus of engagement, and you look across particularly large scale enterprises that you all are working and supporting, how do you foster that culture? How do you get employees to prioritize diversity, equity, inclusion? How do you get them to think about this as a priority personally and for the organization? Because we understand growing culture and inspiring culture takes time. We've kind of laid that foundation. But what are some of the things you do to incentivize employees to really make this a top of mind priority and something that they want to live and breathe day to day? Maybe one of you who wants to maybe take that question.
Well, I'll just throw something out quick. We started kind of we're trying to figure out how to reach all employees. Again, 16,000 employees. Everybody does not have access to email. And we're spread over 15 states and 110 facilities. It's hard to reach everybody at any given time. So we put a mobile app in place probably about a year and a half ago. Several things fell into place before COVID that I'm very lucky they were timed the way that they were. But it's all about teammate engagement. We call it One Team. And it's all about engagement. And so really last year, we started focusing on teammate success stories. And so throughout this conversation, I know we're going to probably talk about some technology things that come in, but a simple thing that you think about when you do interviews, it's like we were guilty. I'll say I'm the first one who's guilty. I never thought about, when I did a panel interview, who's in the room with me interviewing a candidate. And so when people don't see anybody like them in the room, it's like, what does that say? And so we focused on trying to get a broad brush. Here's teammate stories. Here's how people have worked their way up through the company. Here's success stories where people have gotten degrees. Here's how people, we talked about when COVID hit, parents trying to figure out how do I work and be a parent, a school team, how do I do it, and a spouse, how do I do all that during COVID? And so we focused on some of those intent. Here's how real teammates are making it through COVID. And so that goes out to probably about 90% of our teammates. That's about 14,000 or so, give or take. And so they're seeing real stories, and the engagement from that right there has really skyrocketed, because it's you interact with it, you can like it, you can comment on it. We see a lot of positive interaction just by letting people see other real life stories of what people are doing.
Excellent. I think that's great, Daryl. And I think one of the things I've heard from each of you so far has been the sense of ownership throughout the organization. I think that's key, that it doesn't resonate with just a specific group within HR or some function or council, but it takes everyone going deep and broad brush to make this a priority. And then secondly, really bringing some healthy accountability to each other in bringing DEI to the forefront and making sure that it is part of our conversations. We're practicing active listening. We're leaning in with empathy to hear how our employees are feeling and even our customers. I do want to pivot into some of the technology aspects. And Lake, I want to start with you on this. So, many people think of DEI and they think about programs and they think of procedures and policies and certain events. And oftentimes you may not hear the connection between DEI and technology. Maybe you can share some perspective with our audience around how you see technology being a lever to advance DEI. Share some perspective there. And then Zenia, I'd love for you to comment on that as well.
So in terms of, leveraging technology, there are a few different ways to slice this. One is essentially, I think I'm touching about, I'm going to go back to what I had mentioned earlier. While we have our, metrics and reporting and everything that we track, it's about, having a diverse group. How did it, how we also, look at reporting in terms of what are the new thoughts that came into formulating something, formulating a design, or I go back to, formulating products. What is it that we are benefiting? And there is a sense, there is definitely focus on reporting with respect to that aspect as well. So yes, so large corporates, like I was saying, they have already invested and they continue to invest in having pretty large diverse teams. And me being a part of a global team, that the diversity is essentially on steroids, because we have so many people, and you have several large programs which then touch across multiple geographies, their rules and regulations, their local sensibilities, their their fears, and I mean, in a weird way, the pandemic actually brought all of us together, right? Otherwise, largely it's like people in the UK are dealing with their own thing, and people in India and people in Singapore and Vietnam, they're dealing with their own thing. And so even kind of making diversity or technology enable diversity out there was tending to become more of a metric and a reporting driven exercise. But then this, so the pandemic kind of helped us in a way where we all kind of like shared our stories. And again, in kind of bringing it back to the technology aspect, I think where we've seen a lot of true impact with the diverse teams is essentially comes back to data. And I think that's where I'm going to link it back to AI, because the focus is for every, for the company as a whole, as well as individual regions, to really think about who their target population is, right? So no, we have the good privilege of working in a very diverse, very heterogeneous population. Many other countries don't. So even getting through the thought of hey, my target population is homogenous. Why do I care? I'm like, no. I mean, no population is truly homogenous. Within even a specific population, even within a specific country, there is that level of diversity. So to get down to that aspect, and then that's where we bring in a lot of data through technology, saying that okay, when you go out, everyone doesn't look like you, right? So let's look at the target population, and then let's look at how we are going to feed our data into what you are trying to produce for your target population. So there is the regional angle, and then when we look at programs that are truly global, then that's when we bring in the complete population and say, hey, is this now truly representative, not only about the workforce and the company, but also is it also representative of the population that we are targeting? And that population includes companies as well, because companies are not machines. So there are people inside the companies. So how do we kind of bring in all that? So yes, so at the most minute level, I would say it's metrics and reporting. Yes, I don't like to use those terms, but it's essentially the thought behind the data that we are collecting, which is not just, it is a multi-dimensional data, multi-geography data. And then that's how we kind of, bring it, we've had these conversations, and a lot of these conversations are very, very difficult to have. I mean, especially with workforces who are very kind of like set in their ways. Okay, this is how this kind of a company need to work. And I think that's where we are using a lot of, meaningful data and cross-referencing data to say, hey, this kind of forces us pretty much to, to open up our minds a little bit. Yeah.
Yeah, no, excellent perspective. And I want to connect to that, Xenia, and maybe have you comment on, because we talked a little bit about this when we were prepping for the session today, and how when you think about this data and the analytics, we know that it's all about data these days. You can derive so many powerful insights from your data, but we also understand in artificial intelligence and machine learning, right, the development of algorithms and models could have some connection to human biases, right? So the folks that are actually developing these models and these algorithms could just innately create some bias, and that could be portrayed through the data we see. So how do you think we can help combat some of that challenge when we're thinking about talent acquisition, hiring, and retention of employees?
So if I think about just being aware of the fact that there is that potential, if we are using it in terms of hiring practices, for instances, and trying to isolate to the skills rather than the experience, where they went to college, who they, where they live, it's making sure that we isolate and identify from a data perspective which are those data variables that have a higher propensity for bias to occur, and making sure that we create a framework for the use of that data that will control for that. So it is being very thoughtful about the selection of the data points and ensuring that we have a framework to not only be aware of that at the beginning, but to also monitor for that, and on the back end, look at the results and test that to ensure that we are not perpetuating those biases through the selection of our data, or how we've determined that we're going to apply those particular capabilities. So that's what I could offer on that end.
I think that's great, Xenia, and you really kind of summarized. So it's looking at specific data elements and identifying how that data connects to those biases, and really having some internal and difficult conversations on how we combat and respond to that. That's one of the questions we actually got in the chat. And Daryl, maybe you can hit on this a little bit as well, because I know Coca-Cola has been kind of developing an AI platform. How do you think you lead those conversations internally when you've got this, this mechanism out here where you can leverage technology, but these biases exist, and you need to train people and develop people, and people need to understand what these unconscious and even conscious biases are? How do you start those conversations internally, and what can our audience do as being influential leaders in their respectful places help move this vision forward?
Yeah, Tay, hopefully I'll give you a little bit of insight. We're just new on this journey, but it has been something that myself and other Coke bottlers in the technology space have been talking about, how to remove the bias from data. We're all looking at automation. We're trying to move at the speed of light to automate so many processes, whether it's from automated screening of interviewees by one-way video, picking up facial recognition, ticks, speed, whatever, all these types of things. We're automating those types of things. We're automating processes, but our AI platform that we're currently using probably won't be the best situation for you, because it's specifically our first use case is to help support and improve our service desk, which again is taking people who are answering phones and actually letting them interact with the chat bot. So it's a little bit more scripted. So unless you have a knowledge, help somebody through, if your PC is broken, what do you do? Step 1, step 2, step 3. Thank goodness. My hope is we won't introduce bias in those knowledge bases there. But one of the things that I will tell you that we have learned just through we do this, because it's constant grooming of how the chatbot operates and responds. It is dependent on who helps drive the knowledge base, and this will talk about diversity a little bit and about skill and things of that nature. Is when you start to recognize folk, we all speak differently. We all come from different places. And I'm the first one that's going to tell you, I probably struggled in grammar. I mean, I am not a grammar king. And so you have the way people write. And so you think about those types of things, and you could say that's an issue that we have to try to focus on, and how to educate people to think about. You have to take this as very nondescript. You take those kind of subtle things. But when we start dealing with some of the things that the chatbot's going to recommend, it's going to start pointing us to the use cases that we need to go after. That's where I'm going to have to keep this team kind of focused to say, to Xenia's point, let's not introduce bias. And when we start to automate, it could be even how we automate some of those HR recruiting processes, to skip over something that's an element of, if we're looking at a resume and we see punctuation or whatever. I mean, I know that's important to a lot of us, but we've missed out a lot of good candidates because of some of those things like that. And so we just got to do a little bit different way of teaching our folks, but we're just getting started. It's top of mind. It's a topic for a lot of the Coke system about how do we not unfairly treat our customers and our teammates, because we inherently put bias into anything that we create.
Daryl, I think you hit a great point, and I'm glad you leaned into this from an HR perspective. A couple things there I want to comment. I think all of you shared some really valuable insights on looking at diversity, inclusion, and equity, and how it connects to these biases. You know, even thinking about how when you are developing and training people and you're preparing for an interview, there can be automation and notifications around, have those interviewers and leaders been trained on unconscious bias and know what to look for and what not, and what to steer away from before an interview and before a discussion with the candidate. One of the other things I think you really touched on, which was very pivotal, is when we think about the ecosystem of business, oftentimes you as technology leaders have worked on the other side with the business leaders to advance program transformations, introduce new products, innovative technology solutions, et cetera. What I love about DEI is that it's causing a turn for internal business and technology leaders to now serve HR as customers, right? So to think about how you partner with internal functions to provide solutions to your internal stakeholders, and how they can look at and answer the questions around, are we recruiting diverse talent? Are there gaps in our compensation equity? We can provide solutions and technology that give them that data and those insights to even help them better perform and execute on their function. So those are some really good points. Now, we have hit on employee experience, which I could stay there all day because I love talking about people. And we're going to stay on the topic of people. But I do want Xenia to lean into this. So when we think about diversity, equity, and inclusion, oftentimes we also have to think about the customer experience as organizations, right? I know at CapTech, we have a CX practice, and we think a lot about, when partner with our clients, the customer journey, how they look at designing solutions and customer personas, and what do you want your customer experience to be. Xenia, of late, there's been so much conversation about accessibility, making digital products available for a broad, diverse group. I would love to get your perspective as a client experience platform director at Truist. What's been your focus in terms of how you think about accessibility for digital as well as even for brick and mortar storefronts?
So I will have to say, I'm not an expert in accessibility. We do have a team, however, embedded within our technology group that is a focus where that's what they're constantly looking at, is how do we create accessible digital experiences. However, as part of the personalization strategy, obviously the client messages that we have, making sure that when those are displayed in a digital environment, it serves all of our clients. So we do have line of sight into, is the content that we're creating accessible? Are we rendering those images in a way that all of our clients would be able to view and connect with and respond to? So absolutely, that technology element of it to create that accessibility is part and parcel of how we design all of our digital spaces, which then kind of leads into then some of our physical spaces as well. Although I would say that they are probably more mature in that, because they've had to consider things like accessibility into the building, for instance, and counter heights and things like that, ATM, the ability to be able to serve clients who might be hearing impaired or visually impaired. So they've incorporated that into that space, but with digital, it's more so the rendering of those images. And because of the technology, I think it does give us a level of flexibility to be able to respond to that very quickly, which is nice to see.
Excellent, excellent. Oh, great. Thanks for sharing that perspective. So I know we've got about 10 minutes left and there's a breakout session. So there's a couple things I want to try to insert as we wrap up. This has been a great discussion. I know it can continue. Man, I can't imagine the energy in the room if we did this in person, Kim. It would be fantastic. So we have to figure out how to do that in the future. But I want to hit on a couple things before we wrap up today. First, the pandemic forced companies to pivot, right? It made people innovate, re-engineer, reinvent themselves, really think about how they go to market with certain services and capabilities. And crisis kind of pushed all organizations into that corner, and folks were forced to figure out how to strive in this new normal. I want you, with some inspiring words, but yet some challenging words, think about and share with this audience. If companies don't really lean into diversity, equity, and inclusion and ensure that it is a part of their strategy, there was a consistent a survey result that I saw that 96% of CEOs right now ensure that DEI is part of their strategy. There is an intentional reason for that. Now, we know it just can't be plastered in the roadmap and the strategy. It's got to be infused in the culture. But I want you all to share, as you're on this journey independently, as team and executive leaders, as well as in your organization, what can happen if companies truly don't take this seriously and focus on it? What's the impact from a morale perspective, from a culture and a team and an employee recognition or retention perspective, from acquiring new employees? What are some of those impacts that you could see if companies truly don't harness this and make it a focal priority? Daryl, you want to start with that one?
Yeah, I can. Well, I'll go back to something you said earlier. Maybe Anthony, you said it. It's talking about that embedding everything in the culture. We have a new wave of future and teammates. I don't know what the current thing is called. It's whatever is not of those in my home. And they see through this. If you're not sincere, they don't have interest in working for organizations. Number one, they don't care about the sustainability of our environment, the way we treat each other. They're very, very vocal. And it's not to say that other age groups don't feel that way, because I personally, it's something that's passionate for me. I didn't need the things that happened last year to feel passionate about it. It just reinforced I need to be a part of change. But I feel like if companies don't take this seriously, if they don't develop programs, if it's just lip service, the people that it matters to the most, creating a value employee proposition, why do I want to work here? Why do I give my time more than I give at home to this company? I mean, who wants to get behind that if you don't believe in it? And, so I've learned a lot from my own young son about what matters to him most. And, and I have teammates that I learned from at the office, and, they want to know that the company, it's serious. It's not just, we're not checking the box. We've already touched on that so many times, but I hear it more and more and more. I don't want to just work here. I've been at Coke for 31 years. There's a lot of folks can't say they've been in a company that long. Coca-Cola can tell you they have a lot of tenured people, and we're there for a reason, because we love the culture. I think a lot more people want to own a career like that. They want to feel like they're contributing to the bigger picture, and feeling like what they do, say, and contribute makes a difference. In the end, is what's going to make people win. What's going to make a company successful. We're as good as the product. Like I said that before, you're as good as your product. You're as good as the service and the accessibility. If you're not in tune with the teammate, because you lose both teammates and customers out the window. So that's my long-winded answer there.
No, it's great. Laika, can you append to what Daryl said? And as you think about maybe even giving this audience and all of us as leaders a call to action, something to create thought as we leave this forum tonight, and as we go forward and say, what's my next step? What are some key takeaways and things you think we need to be thinking about, leaning into, and bringing discussion within our organizations?
Well, I would think that, I mean, at least for me personally, that's how I started my whole own journey. And it's about, it's a lot of self-reflection, and it's a lot of humility that needs to come, come within as well. Because, when these, when DEI was introduced as topics, and when, with the corporates and, the commitment to that, my initial thought in my, in my head was, I don't look at anything. It doesn't matter. I don't look at color. I don't look at race. I'm just so focused on, hey, I need people with these skills, and then that's what I'm looking for. I mean, I don't filter a resume in any way. I hate ATS, so I don't run the the robot reviewing resumes. I mean, I don't mind going through hundreds of them, and I've told my teams as well. And I also felt that the team was thinking the same way as I did, so it was almost kind of like self-affirming. But then we had, we all kind of as a team, look back, and I do credit some of our senior leaders to kind of open the curtain, so to speak, saying that, okay, it's not just enough to know that you and your team are not looking at filtering out based on such specific criteria, but what are you doing to enhance that enhance that inclusivity? It's not just enough to say, okay, me and my team don't have bias, so hey, don't ding us. And I think that's where we started to really then make an effort to as corny as it sounds, I mean, educate ourselves on different cultures, right? And when we were meeting, it was easy. It was, guess what, through food, right? Of course, difficult for me as a vegetarian, but even then, right? I mean, we would get together and taste each other's food, and hear all these wonderful stories about their grandmas and grandpas, and watch Netflix shows about people who came from the Andes, and there's so much of vibrant conversation there. And the other thing that we also are doing is really partnering with some of the colleges and universities, saying that, hey, maybe this is the kind of skills that we are looking at, can you all try and include some of these courses, or maybe send them over for internship. The other thing we've also been trying, we've been very open to doing is mentoring. So if we see that so some of these advanced skill sets, we're not getting as diverse a resume pool as we would like, it means that we need to do work as well. So we are openly offering ourselves up, especially to women of color, people of color, people of different races, to come and offer ourselves up as mentors, and to kind of just walk through their journey, like intern with us, understand our culture, let us understand your culture. And it's the same thing, and not just there are a lot of international students who are in the mix as well. That gives its own flavor. So it's about, so I would say it's two things. It's a lot of self-reflection, it's a lot of self-correction, and then not just relaxing and say, oh, this is an HR thing, let HR go and figure out how to get me the diverse resumes. But what are we actively doing as a team? How do many of us partner with nonprofits, we go and give lectures, and then that's how we've started getting people interested in core engineering. And so we feel that this is the effort that we're doing. It's not going to immediately yield results, but maybe 5 years down the line, 10 years down the line, it's going to yield results. So sorry, I took too much time, but
no, Leica, I think that's great. And I think that that's a great call to action, because oftentimes that introspection is overlooked. And if we don't introspect and look at ourselves and acknowledge that we have biases, all of us do have these biases, and we got to educate and learn. And I love the themes of leaning into people and listening and understanding their cultures. All right, Xenia, you're going to bring us home. So if there's one final thing you want to share with this audience to really inspire and propel everybody to really think about, how do we take this conversation, not just, oh, this was a great panel, but how do we take it forward back to our organizations and advance the mission forward of DEI?
Well, I think that we first have to consider that DEI is foundational to our relevancy, right? who we're representing, the ability to get these perspectives and give voice to these various perspectives to spur innovation, to spur dialogue, and at the end of the day, to serve our clients, because that's what we're here to do. So I do think that it's foundational to the success of our organizations, as well as ourselves as people, right? To be able to connect with people in a way that says, despite these differences, we still find commonality in our humanity. And so I would say that just keeping that perspective, our perspective needs to be higher than just ourselves.
Excellent. Excellent. That's a great way to put a wrapper around a great discussion. I don't know about any of you, but I'm more energized than when I started. So we probably would be doing it all night if we were in person. So maybe the virtual is helping us kind of facilitate the end of the conversation. I want to first thank our panelists. They were fantastic in sharing.
You were fantastic, Anthony. I mean, yeah.
You were fantastic too. Yes. Yes.
Diligently taking notes.
Well, thank you. Well,
it's amazing. Yeah.
This is a passionate area of mine too. I've been connecting with leaders across other organizations on this, and I'm really excited. One of the things I learned in the pandemic is how, to Xenia's point, the commonality of how now we connect, not just to do business, right? We connect on human level, interact points such as this, and that's where we can share ideas, build relationships in a genuine, authentic way. So I'm really excited just to share with our audience. Kim will probably share some additional details via email, but this will be available. This will be available via video, so you can be able to share this with your teams. But this was a great focus in kind of wrapping up on what DEI means to all of us as leaders, what's the organizational construct and how you organize around it being deep and broad, how technology influences it, and then what's our personal mission and what we can do once we leave here. So Leica, Xenia, Daryl, thank you again for your time. Audience, thank you. And now I'm going to turn it back over to Kim to wrap us up.
Just inspirational. Thank you all so much. I learned. I learned. And wow. Thank you. Thank you, CapTech. Thank you, Amazon Web Services, and thank you everybody in the room for being here. Your participation in these kinds of conversations, again, lifts our mission to serve so many nonprofits here who serve so many in need in our community.